le sujet qui nous réunit aujourd'hui part d'un constat qui est à la fois simple et vertigineux. On doit décarboner l'économie mondiale, atteindre les objectifs de l'accord de Paris, c'est-à-dire qu'il nous faut des milliards de milliards chaque année. D'ici 2030, on parle, une des sources que j'avais vues parlait de 6 milliards de milliards. Donc là, on est dans des chiffres vraiment vertigineux. Qui va les financer? Qui va financer ces investissements dans les pays en développement? On a vu que les pays riches ont pris des engagements à la COP 29. Donc, et puis tout le monde s'est engagé à essayer de lever encore plus de fonds. Donc, au-delà de ces chiffres, ce qui transparaît, c'est que le secteur privé aura un très grand rôle à jouer pour atteindre ces objectifs et que les institutions publiques auront, elles, un rôle à jouer pour aider à mobiliser les fonds privés. Alors moi, comme journaliste, j'ai l'impression que ça fait des décennies que j'entends parler des bienfaits des partenariats publics-privés, des effets leviers, etc. Mon impression, c'est qu'on n'est pas là où on voudrait être encore, mais vous allez m'en dire plus. Quels sont les freins à cette finance mixte ? Comment le contexte actuel complique ou accélère peut-être les tendances et quel rôle peut jouer le Canada et le modèle canadien dans ce monde en changement. J'ai la chance d'avoir des représentants de deux institutions qui connaissent bien ces questions. Alors, je me lance tout de suite, peut-être avec Marc-André. Ce que je voudrais entendre de vous deux, c'est de comprendre quelle place joue la finance mixte, et en particulier pour le climat, dans vos institutions respectives.
Alors, merci. Je suis vraiment heureux d'être ici avec Sandrine et Laurie de FinDev. C'est une institution extraordinaire. Je suis le plus grand fan de FinDev Canada. Alors, je suis à la CDPQ. Je suis responsable de l'investissement durable avec Bertrand Millot qui est ici. Et je suis aussi responsable de la coordination des opérations à l'extérieur du Canada, du Québec. Et je veux juste vous mettre la finance durable dans le contexte de la caisse. Puis c'est quoi le rôle d'un allocateur d'actifs, d'un propriétaire d'actifs comme la caisse dans la transition? Et vous connaissez tous les politiques climatiques de la caisse passées. On a commencé la première fois en 2017. On a augmenté nos actifs verts. On a maintenant 58 milliards d'actifs verts ou d'actifs sobres en carbone. C'est donc 3 fois plus qu'on avait en 2017. On a diminué notre empreinte carbone. Depuis 2017, c'est moins de 69 %. Mais l'économie réelle, l'empreinte carbone de l'économie réelle, comme vous savez, a augmenté de 6 %. Et là, nous, en 2021, on a rehaussé nos cibles, on a annoncé notre sortie du pétrole, on a annoncé la création d'une enveloppe de transition, justement pour accélérer, rehausser notre rôle dans la décarbonation de l'économie. Et là, on a eu des expériences avec nos propres actifs avec lesquels on a pu, au fil des ans, vous savez, it matters who owns what. Qui est propriétaire de quoi, ça fait une différence. Je peux vous dire, il y a une compagnie Apraava en Inde qui produisait de l'électricité au charbon. C'est une compagnie qui maintenant nous appartient et on a transféré une grande partie de leur production vers du renouvelable. On a fait la même chose avec AES Indiana aux États-Unis. La même chose, c'était de la production au charbon et on transfère graduellement vers de la production de renouvelable. Alors, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Ça veut dire que pour nous, pour l'avenir, on voit beaucoup notre rôle par des engagements avec nos compagnies en portefeuille, avec elles pour s'assurer que, en fait, elles ont des plans de décarbonation et aussi s'assurer qu'on contribue véritablement à accélérer la transition aussi par nos investissements et qu'on investisse plus dans des solutions climatiques. Alors oui, les actifs sobres en carbone, mais ajouter plus les solutions fondées sur la nature, à travailler avec les facilitateurs de solutions climatiques, puis aussi les solutions d'adaptation. Et c'est là beaucoup que le blended finance entre en ligne de compte. Il y a beaucoup de choses en adaptation, il y a beaucoup de choses aussi dans d'autres catégories d'investissement où le risque-retour, l'équation risque-retour n'est pas la bonne pour des investisseurs institutionnels comme nous. Et il faut trouver un moyen de développer, et c'est ça le défi de la finance mixte en ce moment, c'est de trouver un moyen de développer des instruments qui vont nous permettre d'accélérer notre participation, d'augmenter notre participation à des choses qui sont nécessaires à la transition, comme par exemple l'investissement dans l'adaptation et par exemple aussi dans certaines solutions fondées sur la nature. Alors c'est ça, c'est là où ça s'inscrit pour un allocateur d'actifs comme la CDPQ.
Alors, la finance mixte est en augmentation au sein de la CDPQ?
Oui, en fait, la finance mixte est en augmentation. Il y a eu une belle croissance de la finance mixte au cours des 7-8 dernières années. Il y a à peu près, Convergence a sorti le chiffre d'à peu près 250 milliards de transactions de finances mixtes qui ont été faites dans le monde au cours des 7-8 dernières années, dans à peu près 100-1200 projets. Et ça, moi, je ne pense pas que ça répertorie tout, mais ça donne une idée. On a vu qu'il y a une tendance qui s'en va en s'accroissant. J'étais à une réunion à la dernière Climate Week à New York l'an passé, et Larry Fink de BlackRock disait on a besoin de la finance mixte. Mais le problème de la finance mixte, c'est... Alors là, d'entendre Larry Fink dire ça, c'était un changement. Et deux, ce qu'il disait, c'est... Mais le problème de la finance mixte, c'est comme faire du pain dans sa cuisine. C'est un pain à la fois, puis tu ne sais pas trop comment il va sortir du four. Et c'est ça l'enjeu de la finance mixte.
On va revenir à ces problèmes structurels. Laurie, what about FinDev? How big is mixed finance there?
Absolutely. So, merci Sandrine, merci Marc-André. Je suis une fan de la caisse aussi. Merci. So maybe just to level set, I'll just describe FinDev Canada. So who are we? So FinDev Canada, we're Canada's bilateral development finance institution. So we're owned by the government. We provide financing and investment, blended finance solutions, as well as technical assistance and advisory in emerging markets and developing economies. We work across 3 emerging market regions. We work in Latin America, the Caribbean, we work in Sub-Saharan Africa, and we work in the Indo-Pacific region. As a development finance institution, we make all of our capital allocation decisions with an impact lens. So what does that mean? We look to uphold and have positive contribution towards climate and nature action, local market development, and gender equality and women's economic empowerment. So we're a tool in the government's toolkit to help support sustainable and inclusive growth, again, in emerging markets and developing economies. And when it comes to climate finance is a really important portion of our portfolio. We have a climate change strategy under which we have a goal of 35%. We've already achieved that goal, so we're well on our way to complying with that by the end of 2025. I can maybe give a quick example of a climate finance transaction.
Yep.
Excellent. So Thailand. So Thailand is a country, obviously, in Asia that has an important transition, infrastructure transition, energy transition underway. So they have agreed to set a goal of net zero by 2065. So how is FinDev Canada supporting that? So last year, in 2024, we provided a $59 million loan to Gulf Renewable Energy, which is a large renewable energy platform in Thailand. We're supporting the construction and operation of a dozen renewable energy solar PV projects, half of them with battery storage, across the country of Thailand. So what is this doing in terms of impact? So 14,000 gigawatt hours of electricity are being produced, 600,000 tons of CO2 annually that are being displaced, and that's the equivalent of 130,000 cars off the road every year. So we're really contributing to the energy transition in Thailand. So that's climate finance, and that's how we allocate our own capital towards a climate action in an emerging market. I'll go to blended finance, which was your question, and how important is blended finance? It's a really important tool in our toolkit. We had an original blended finance facility that was funded in partnership with Global Affairs Canada that we've effectively deployed. And that on the back of that, there was an announcement last year at the G7, which we're very excited about, a $700 million facility, blended finance facility, concessional finance facility for FinDev Canada. And how we're looking to deploy that is through both blended finance to help address the risk-return profile and needs and investor appetite at the transaction level, so an individual renewable energy project, for example, as well as through platforms or vehicles that are designed to mobilize private capital at scale. And I have another example of that if I could share. So one example of the first utilization of that $700 million of blended finance is a platform called Gaia, and in fact, CDPQ was a wonderful partner and contributed a lot in the early genesis of the Gaia platform. We're bringing it to market with MUFG, and what is it? It's a $1.5 billion blended finance platform. So we're bringing in concessional finance resources and catalytic capital from the Green Climate Fund, from FinDev Canada's concessional finance facility that I just mentioned, as well as crowding in private sector investment. And we're looking to deploy this in 25 emerging markets, including an important proportion for less developed countries and small island developing states to support adaptation projects, as Marc-Andre mentioned, is really, really important, as well as mitigation projects. So that's an example of a platform and the critical importance of blended finance in our toolkit.
And I was going to ask you if you had worked together already, but you answered that. And I see time, time is running out. I have a lot of questions for you too. So if we'll take the example of the bread in the kitchen that you just gave, before looking at how the oven works, maybe let's look at how the neighborhood works. We're in a particular moment in time, and I'm just wondering how does that affect the work you do, Marc-Andre? In terms of blended finance, is that making blended finance more difficult, or is it opening new opportunities?
It's totally opening new works, and blended finance is going to be essential to the transition, because a lot of what we need to be doing doesn't fit the right risk-return equation, and if we don't get the amount of capital needed to actually do what we need to be doing, the transition, you already know it's so immense, and we need to have everybody that can put in some slices of capital, depending on their risk appetite, we need to actually develop the tools to make it happen this way. And people are talking about blended finance, and they say, no, that's in emerging markets only. No, blended finance is here in Montreal. Blended finance is going to be part of the solution in Canada and the US. The RRA is a vast program of blended finance. The REM in Montreal that we have just a few meters from here is 67 kilometers of light rail train. That's a blended finance project, a project between CDPQ, le gouvernement du Québec, Hydro-Québec, Aéroport de Montréal, le gouvernement du Canada, la Banque d'infrastructure du Canada et les villes dans lesquelles le train circule. Et alors, ça permet le REM. It's all about a solution that reduces the carbon footprint of the city of Montreal. It's necessary for the transition, and it's a vital infrastructure for the city. So it presents huge opportunities for institutional investors. The problem is, it's actually, for emerging markets, most governments so far thought that was the job of the World Bank. But the World Bank is tiny, and it won't be able to actually leverage or mobilize the private capital. The institutional investors like CDPQ, when you take all of them in the world together, were 900 times bigger than all of the multilateral banks taken together. But yet, there's very, very few instruments that is geared towards engaging us. And so this is when we talk about the reform of the World Bank, some people are saying, including the executive director of the IMF, Madame Georgieva, is saying the World Bank should become the de-risking tool of institutional investors. And I actually tend to agree with her. And this is, for the future, for Canadians, it represents a huge opportunity, because what are we trying to do with that is actually, we're trying to do infrastructure. This is something that Canada is a champion of, or one of the champions of. And we have the right ecosystem on the financial side, on the technological side, on the engineering side, for the lawyers, for the accountants, and we're used to deal with stakeholders and all of that. And it's a tough thing to be doing. And so you need to, like, le REM is a real success on that front. In a few years, we were able to put it together. Like, just compare the REM versus the train between San Francisco and LA, which started, I think, in the 80s and is not yet built. There's not a 1-inch built. Because what is the problem sometimes? We tend to make it too perfect. And that's one of the issues we'll have with blended finance in the future as well. We need to actually work at solutions built on trust and partnering with each other like never before to make these things happen at a scale and speed necessary for.
But so, Marc-André, I hear you talk, and it's
transition.
as if nothing was happening south of the border.
Sorry?
When I hear you talk, it's as if nothing was happening south of the border, that there was no retreat on climate spending, USAID. I know we're talking about blended finance here, but so I'm just curious, you mentioned an opportunity for Canada. I want to talk for a minute with Laurie. I mean, because your institution is involved in the G7 talks. I'm trying to understand what exactly we're hoping to achieve at the G7, knowing that we have the richest member that may be not as interested in climate, for instance, that maybe other members.
It's a great question. I think I have to echo what Marc-André said, that we really go to this in terms of looking at the opportunity, right? And so underneath the official G7 track at the leaders level, there is a work stream and a work plan around the G7 development finance institutions. And FinDev Canada is leading that track right now. And so one of the overarching thematics for both Canada as well as our development finance track is mobilizing more private capital into emerging markets and developing economies. And so what are we concretely doing to kind of seize the opportunity, regardless of what's going on in the broader ecosystem? So a couple of things. One is, as Marc-André mentioned, the institutional investors have really deep pockets, and there's a lot of capital there that we can harness both for developed markets as well as emerging markets. And so one thing that we're doing is a very concrete deliverable under the G7 agenda to advance private capital mobilization is we're working with the Investor Leadership Network. And for those of you who don't know, the ILN was actually a Canadian deliverable under Canada's last G7 in 2018 at the same time that FinDev Canada was born. And it's got, I think, 13 members, more than 10 trillion of assets under management of the pension funds, including the Maple 8 here in Canada, of which is well recognized as some of the most forward-leaning and most successful pension funds on the planet. So we're working with the ILN, and to Marc-André's point, we've identified the opportunity for investing in infrastructure in emerging markets. So we're creating the G7 Infrastructure Investment Advisory Council in collaboration with the ILN. So we're harnessing the opportunity and the strengths of the ILN as an association, as well as the G7 DFIs with all the tools in our toolkit that we bring to the table to try and mobilize more investment into infrastructure in emerging markets. One of the things that we're very excited about is moving beyond kind of the talk shop and talking about the barriers and the policy imperatives and what have you, which is all absolutely necessary. But we are looking to actually bring our capital to the table to meet the investors where they are so that we can actually get more capital flowing.
But how would you describe the appetite right now of the private sector for blended finance?
So I think it's greater, as a matter of fact, because as the world, as we know, our tectonic plates are sort of moving underneath our feet in terms of, inflationary pressure, recessionary pressures, employment pressures, et cetera, et cetera. When the world economy gets more complicated, that's exacerbated in emerging markets and developing economies. And so the importance of the tool of blended finance, again, to address real and perceived risks of investors, to not just hopefully increase investment, but actually maintain investment is really, really important. So as things get more complicated and private sector is thinking, maybe I'll pull out, blended finance is absolutely critical, again, to address the risk appetite of investors.
I just want to go back quickly because I'd like to move to structural issues. But so we feel there's a sort of a leadership vacuum a little bit, at least on some questions of climate. So you mentioned the REM as an example. How can Canada take leadership, show leadership on these questions? Is that the G7 is our great opportunity this year?
I think it's the G7. I think it's FinDev Canada. I think it's CDPQ. CDPQ is one of the largest owners in the world of renewable assets. Like, this is leadership by Canada. The top 4 investors in infrastructure in the world are Canadian pension funds. We are gigantic in that role, and most of the infrastructure owned is in relation to the transition. So Canada is already playing a very substantial role. What we need is to build on that and make sure that actually we push it a little bit further, that actually we look at risk slightly differently, all of us, that we develop partnerships that, we couldn't think of these partnerships before. And I'll give you one partnership that was created just after the COP in Dubai. The UAE decided to create a sovereign wealth fund called Altera. They gave Lunetti and Altera, which are sovereign wealth funds affiliated to the UAE, they gave $30 billion for climate in emerging markets. And they gave 3 mandates to asset managers. One of them was Brookfield. And what did we do? Because Brookfield and us are partners in many places around the world. We own a lot of assets together. Temasek is a sovereign wealth fund from Singapore, where we are a partner and co-investor also. So we came in that fund, and we've invested to actually help the transition in emerging markets. So things are happening. Are they happening at a speed that we would like, as fast as we would like, or as is needed? Maybe not, but we're on the verge of actually moving the needle very, very in a significant way. And I think the role of FinDev Canada, the role of the government of Canada, the leadership now of the Prime Minister, who has been heading a lot of this leadership around the world before being Prime Minister of Canada, will probably contribute to that fact. And we should actually leverage this as a huge opportunity. And Montreal, I think, is ranked now in Finance Durable as being the 4th city in the world on Finance Durable or something like that. We should just accelerate and push further, but we need to develop those partnerships. I'll finish on that. I gave you the partnership of CDPQ, Brookfield, and we in the fund of Altera. CDPQ, I think what we need to be doing as Canadians, as Quebecers, Montrealers, is actually think about, okay, where are the partners in the world that are like-minded, and what can we do together, whether it's from a technology perspective, from a financial perspective, from all sorts of things. I'll give you an example in CDPQ. We partnered with DP World in 2016, started to own ports DP World comes from the UAE, started to own ports in Canada with DP World. We built that partnership. 6, 7, 8 years later, we own 13 ports with them around the world. And actually, DP World is a leader in sustainability and a leader of the industry for doing that. So this is the kind of partnership that are win-win that we need to build.
We don't have a lot of time left. Actually, we have very little time left. So I want to talk to you, Laurie, just about what's an example of a best-in-class blended finance? Because I was going to talk about the problems, but we don't have time. So let's talk about a good example.
Talk about the solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, if there were a single best in class, if there were a single silver bullet, if there was one solution, we would have figured it out by now. And that's the challenge, is that there's not one single solution. It's really a solution set. We're really in that launch and learn kind of phase. So the example that Marc-André gave with Altera and with Brookfield and with the KES, like, that's a fabulous opportunity. Is that a blueprint that can be replicated, that can be adapted? The Gaia platform that I spoke about earlier, we're looking at that again as a blueprint. How do we adapt it to different geographies, to different sectors, to different risk appetites of different investors? So I think it's kind of an all of the above phase that we're in right now. There's no single solution, but I think key to the conversation is we need different capital, we need blended finance, we need catalytic capital that can take on the risks that not all investors are able to do, or they're able to do with different types of appetite. So that's really the key to unlock the bigger puzzle.
So I feel like you've both given already a call to action to Montreal, but I'm really keen on taking question. If there's one, we could take one. Or are you all in a hurry to go to the cocktail, which we all know is coming up? Is there a hand raised? I don't see any hand. All right, is there anything else in our last minute that you feel we haven't covered on this?
For me, it's what we need to be doing is build trust to make these partnerships real. We need to invest. I've had 4 careers in my life. People ask me, when you get old, people ask you, how did you do in your career? They're all the same. One was as a lawyer, the other was a CEO of a law firm, then a diplomat, and now in investment. It's all the same thing. It's about a relationship, building trust, listening to the other person, putting yourself in the shoes of the partner in front of you, and try to look at the perspective of what will make the deal happen from that perspective. Also, excellence doesn't mean perfection, as I said. And now we are on a journey that was never tried before. So it's not going to be a straight line to net zero. We're going to make some learnings, we're going to make some bad things, but the direction is there. I actually strongly believe we can do this, and we will do this. But we need to build trust, and we need to actually agree to actually get into partnerships that maybe the person is not exactly our mirror or the same alignment totally. But on this specific project, we could be very well aligned, because we need to work differently. We need to work with speed, a speed that we have not worked before, on a scale that we have not worked before, so this is why it's so crucial to go back to the basic and think about that. And it's not because you disagree with someone that if you talk to that person that it means that you agree with that person. But we need to engage to get it done.
Yeah, I would pick up on that. I think the scale of the challenge before us presents an equal opportunity, and I couldn't agree more with the trust and with the collaboration and with the partnership that Marc-André was saying. And you mentioned Temasek, you mentioned Singapore. We just opened an office in Singapore, and I can't help but think of a Singaporean saying that is, one hand can't clap, it takes two working together to make a sound. And I think that's exactly what we need to do to go further, faster.
And for those who are in financial institutions, there are risks, but also look at the returns, but also there's a risk in not doing anything.
Indeed.
All right, well, thank you for ending the day on a high note. Let's thank our panelists.
Thank you.